and dolls, cats and kittens. I hope you all are enjoying fall out there. We are having a beautiful turn of the aspen this year. I think it's because of all the moisture and non-summer that we had here in Colorado. I was wanting to celebrate what I want to call Latino Mexican History Month. And I been doing some research on a project I knew very little about. So it was a lot of growth for me because my family is from New Mexico and Colorado. And the story I want to bring you tonight took place in Texas in 19 from 1910 to 1920. And it's just validation how little things change and often stay the same. And with that, I want to jump into the story because the game is afoot. And I'm going to title this What You Didn't Know About the Texas Rangers. And when I grew up, there was like 3 TV stations. You couldn't wear pants to school. If it snowed, you had to put them on underneath your dress and then take them off when you got to school and then put them on again if you had gym. And I did grow up in a Latin neighborhood. We were not allowed to speak any Spanish at school at all. And if somebody immigrated here and was having trouble, with the language translation, they put them in special education classes because there was nowhere else for them to go. And this was generally a Latin Mexican American populated school. So, I totally understand what happened here because I did feel quite controlled. But I also grew up, in a tumultuous times when those things were being challenged, much as they are right now. So the only thing I can hope is that we continue to challenge the inaccuracies and inequities of our culture. And this period of time is called La Matanza, which stands for the massacre or the slaughter, and the Hora de Sangre, which is the hour of blood. And I'm going to read you from Wikipedia now, describing to you what this time period was like. It was a period of anti-American violence in Texas, including lynchings and massacres between 1910 and 1920, and tensions between the United States and Mexico during the Mexican Revolution. Yay, Pancho Villa y Emilio Zapata. This violence was committed by Anglo-Texan vigilantes and law enforcement such as the Texas Rangers during operations against bandit raids known as the Bandit Wars. The violence and denial of civil liberties during this period were justified by racism. The Texas Rangers violence reached its peak from 1950 to 1919 in response to increasing conflict, initially because of the Plan de San Diego by Mexican and Tejano insurgents to take Texas. Oh, I bet that really pissed them off. This period was referred to as La Hora de Sangre by the Mexicans in South Texas, many of whom fled to Mexico to escape the violence. Oh, great. There's a Mexican Revolution going on there. You come here, you get treated like crap. You run back there, you get treated like crap. And the chances of being killed on either end are pretty great. At least 300 Mexican Americans were killed in Texas during the 1910s, with the total estimates ranging from hundreds to thousands that were killed. At least 100 Mexicans were lynched in the 1910s in Texas. Many murders were concealed and went unreported, with some in South Texas suspected by Rangers or supporting rebels being placed on blacklist and often disappearing. Oh my God, sounds like what's happening now. maybe not on that numerical scale, but we don't know. But yeah, it's still taking place now. Some of the worst racial violence in the United States history took place along the Mexico-Tex border from 1910 to 1920. The dead included men and women, the aged, the young, longtime residents, recent arrivals. They were killed by strangers, neighbors, by vigilantes at the hands of law enforcement officers and Texas Rangers. Some were summarily executed after being taken captive or shot under the flimsy pretext of trying to escape. Again, nothing new there. Some were left in the open to rot, others desecrated by being burnt, decapitated, or tortured by means of having beer bottles rammed into their mouths. Extra legal executions became so common that a San Antonio reporter observed that finding of dead bodies of Mexicans suspected for various reasons of being connected to with the troubles has reached the point where it creates little or no interest. It is only when a raid is reported or an American is killed that the ire of the people is aroused. In other words, they were okay with what was happening to the Mexican Americans, Mexicans, whatever. They didn't give a shit as long as their home front was taken care of and they were okay. And when I was getting at, when I was saying there was like 3 channels we used to watch then, there was a lot of cowboy Indian movies. And for the life of me, I could not understand why every movie the Indians got the shit kicked out of them. Every movie, even if they fought valiantly, and no matter how many of them there could have been like a handful of, cowboys fighting them, and they always lost. I could never understand it, and it always made you feel beat up as hell. And then when you saw Mexicans in the movies, well, they were never Mexicans, or they were always like really being stupid. So the status quo that was set for us was not good. And that's why a lot of times we would just go to the Mexican movies and see how a reflection of ourselves in a different attitude and in a way that was positive and beautiful clothing. But anyway, prominent politicians proposed putting all those Mexicans with Mexican descent into concentration camps and killing any who refused. For a decade, people who would come across skeletons in the South Texas brush marked the execution style bullet holes in the back of their skulls. So basically, they had free range to kill any Mexicans that they came across. Changes in both state government and the border set the stage for the cataclysmic violence. By early 20th century, people of Mexican descent had become a small minority in the state of Texas as a whole. Well, hell, they're killing them by the handfuls. It's not a wonder that there's none left. Perhaps no more than 5% of the state's population. But in border enclaves, they remained an overwhelming majority of the population. In these enclaves, although much of their land had fallen into the hands of Anglos, much unlike most of the rest of the state, Spanish converting to Catholicism and marrying into Mexican families rather than to insist on assimilation to Anglo-Texas norms. So merchants, prominent landowners moving into the regions were more likely to adapt themselves to the society that they were living in and converted Spanish to Catholicism and married into Mexican families rather than to try to turn these people away from their culture. And I think that's because they appreciated it. Besides the fact that, Indians are very inherent in our culture. You can't be Mexican without having Indian blood in you. Otherwise, you'd just be plain Spanish. The turbulence of the Mexican Revolution exacerbated an already tense situation over the decade. Nearly a tenth of the Mexican population would perish, and another tenth would flee to the United States, setting into motion a pattern of immigration that endures a century later. Because we know all the problems going on with that, babies in cages, walls going up, discouraging migration, animal population. Americans don't give a shit. Instead of trying to look for, a recognizable plan, it's just better to keep people out, keep Mother Nature in. But now you're just fucking with it all. Army seeking the redistribution of the land in Mexico unsettled South Texas Anglo farmers and provided them with rationale for suppression of remaining American political pattern of rights. So they were then thinking, hey, we don't need any political people who are Mexican here in South Texas either, so we need to get them out. The fulfillment of a manifesto entitled the Plan de San Diego, drafted in South Texas in early 1915. This document called for a liberating army of all races composed of Mexicans, Black, and Indians to kill all white males over the age of 16, overthrow the United States rule in Texas, Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, and California. And we know that didn't work out well. The newly freed territory would form an independent republic, perhaps rejoin Mexico at a future date. The insurrectionists killed only a handful, but prompted indiscriminate reprisals. Pardon me. Indiscriminate, yeah. That meant any Mexican that you've seen walking around the road, you can just kill. Texas Rangers played a key role in these atrocities. On September 28th, 1915, for example, after a dramatic attack derailed a passenger train heading north from Brownsville, Rangers detained 10 ethnic Mexicans nearby, quickly hanging 4 and shooting 4 others. Cameron County Sheriff W.T. Van blamed Ranger Captain Henry Ransom for the killings. Van took 2 suspected men from Ransom, placed them into his custody, and likely saved their lives. Both proved to be innocent of any involvement. Like if you're a Mexican standing around at this point in time, because this is the culture we're talking about, you were open to being pursued for anything they wanted or nothing at all. You didn't have to have an excuse to come after you. This was not Ransom's first such action. A month before, on September 24th, he casually shot Jesus Bazan and Antonio Longoria as they rode by the site where a raid had occurred. Ransom left the bodies exposed, shocking rancher Sam Lane himself, a former ranger, and a young Anglo ranch hand, Roland Warnock, who helped to bury Bazan and Longoria several days later. That fall, Ransom had made a habit of running ethnic Mexicans out of their homes as he patrolled the countryside. At one point, he casually reported to Ranger headquarters in Austin that I drove all the Mexicans from 3 ranches. Former Rangers were also among the worst perpetrators of violence. A.Y. Baker, a Ranger involved in disputed shootings at Mexican suspects during the previous decade, had left the Ranger force to become Hidalgo County Sheriff by 1915. He was killing Mexicans on sight. After a brief resumption of a few raids in the springs of 1916, the country to monitor the uprising, associated with the Plan de San Diego ended. because they killed everybody. But the Rangers' involvement in subordinating ethnic Mexicans continued. Why stop when you got a good thing? In May of 1916, moreover, legislation empowered the governor to appoint 3 loyalty rangers in each area intended to prevent a repeat of the ranger actions of the previous years by dramatically restructuring the force. The most dramatic effort to hold authorities accountable came in 1919 in what became known as the Canales hearings. In 1919, State Representative Jose Tomas Canales, the only Mexican American legislator, because they ran off all the other ones, filed a bill intended to prevent a repeat of the Rangers' actions of the previous year by dramatically restructuring. Of course, I just said that. Required Rangers to have experience as law officers to demonstrate a record of good conduct and obedience to the law in their home counties to post large bonds, and mandated that they were subject to dismissal if county people under siege by Indians and Mexicans. From the state's beginning, legislators defended the Ranger force as living monument to the Mexican banditry as far as they were concerned. Canales was stalked in South Texas and Austin during the investigation, and it nearly cost him his life, he said. The violence had a wider social resonances. It was key to the imposition of a Jim Crow style of subjugation of those of Mexican descent, limiting their voting and regulating most segregated neighbors and schools. On the other hand, it also catalyzed the American Mexican civil rights movement. The course of the uprising convinced some key Mexican Americans in South Texas that revolutionary Mexican nationalism was a dead end and that they were much better off seeking to organize themselves as American citizens with equal access to rights and protections under the U.S. Constitution. So the brutality and the scale of border violence of the 1910s does continue to attract attention to the descendants of some of its victims and of scholars and artists who find it relevant a century later in a nation struggling over the meaning of its southern border and the rights of the Latino and Mexican American population. It's a volatile thing. And even in Colorado, we have our own history. We have the Sand Creek Massacre. We were, part of Mexico with New Mexico, and we were sold off before the Louisiana Purchase and then included in the purchase. And we had princes, kings, and queens back then, but the Anglos considered us monkeys. So when they did take land from us, and they did take a lot of land, they never paid for it either. Why would you have to pay a wild animal for land in their minds? So that money was never reimbursed. There's never been talk of reparations that I've heard, maybe a few small times. But with that, we can only hope to grow together as a planet, as human beings, even though everything about that is being tested in our strength as a humanity right now. I feel and I pray that we will come together as human beings, being proud of our differences, but working together as one. I hope this was enlightening to you. I didn't know anything about it. My first history, I mean, I know that Mexicans have always been treated badly, but my culture, I mean, with big clashes like this came with the Zoot Suit Riot, which I'll be covering next time because I still got a couple of weeks left in this month. So I hope that you appreciated and maybe even learned a thing or two from this craziness, and maybe you'll think and be kind to people in the future. So my guys and dolls, cats and kittens, be safe out there. If you see something, say something about somebody being, like bad in a good way, Just react, say something. You can always say you're sorry later. Anyhow, look forward to catching you in the next episode. Y'all be safe out there. We're coming up on the Hallows Eve, which I absolutely love. I'm going to do some ghost hunting because that's one of my kicks. So y'all be safe. Talk to you next time.